Foreign Secretary, thank you very much for joining me.
It's a pleasure.
Obviously, the United States is extremely worried about the secrets that have been leaked. They're concerned also that maybe even China or Russia had an opportunity to somehow download the computers he's carrying. Are you concerned about that information getting out?
Well, I'm not going to comment on any of the detail of leaked information or whether it's true or false or therefore any degree of concern about it. I will say, as I've said in our Parliament, that everything that we do takes place within a very strong legal framework. That's the position in the United States as well. We have two of the strongest frameworks of law and accountability of any countries in the world for what we do on intelligence matters.
All right, well, let's move on to Syria. There was a friend of Syria meeting over the weekend. Foreign ministers from the group were in Qatar. And, of course, there is a notion that perhaps the United States will start arming in some way the rebels. I want to ask from Britain's point of view, your Prime Minister has been very forward-leaning, so have you, on the need to do something. And yet I hear that the security establishment in Britain is not in favour of arming the Syrian opposition on the ground. What kind of a dilemma does that pose for the British government?
Well, let's be clear, we are in favour of giving assistance and more assistance to the Syrian opposition, to the national coalition, what we might call the democratic, sensible opposition in Syria. And we're doing that in many ways. We give an enormous amount of humanitarian assistance. We're sending them at the moment equipment that saves lives. We're sending body armour. We're sending vehicles that are bulletproofed. We're sending communications equipment, water purification equipment and things of this kind. So the UK is already committed to give that support and to increase that support over the coming months. At the Friends of Syria meeting, which I attended in Doha, there were 11 countries there who give their assistance in different ways. And this is the way that we're doing it at the moment in the United Kingdom.
Well, then let me ask you a direct question. Will Britain arm the rebels, the moderates that you have just talked about right now? You are obviously instrumental in getting the EU to lift the arms embargo. Will you arm them?
We haven't taken any decision about that, is the answer to that. I was absolutely instrumental in getting the EU to lift the arms embargo, but also said at the time, on that same day, that we wouldn't be doing so at this stage, and that we hadn't taken any decision to do that. What we wanted to create, as I explained at the time, was flexibility in policy. After all, the European Union has set its sanctions regime for 12 months now, and we wanted flexibility over that time to change our policy if necessary. But we haven't taken any decision to do that. We would go to our Parliament with it if we did take such a decision. So we haven't done that, but we are helping in very many other ways. You know, it is not just a question about arms.
Except for you clearly want to change the balance of power on the ground. It appears that the West, you, the French, others, and the United States have been very, well, not surprised maybe, but don't want to see the Assad regime winning, as they did with support from Hezbollah and Iran in Qusair and perhaps other places. So I just want to ask you to listen to this little bit of an interview with the Free Syrian Army commander. He told me this just a week ago.
If the balance on the ground doesn't change, there will be no Geneva conference. There will be no peace talks.
What is your reaction to that?
Well, I think there are two things to say to that. One is that it's very important for the regime and the opposition to be ready to go to Geneva, and for them all to remember that if the Geneva conference takes place, it will be based on what we agreed at Geneva last year, the only thing we really agreed at Geneva last year, which is that a transitional government should be created in Syria with full executive authority made up from the regime and the opposition by mutual consent. But I do agree that a political solution requires a better situation on the ground for the opposition. That is what we said together at Doha. I say again that different countries among the Friends of Syria will help in different ways. And the United Kingdom is giving a lot of help of the kind that I have described. Clearly there are other countries. The United States has spoken about direct military support. And clearly the opposition do receive direct military support from other nations as well.
Well, they do indeed. And to that point, I'd like you to react to something that the Syrian foreign minister has said just recently about arming the opposition.
Technically, they'll be arming the Nusra Front. I ask everyone to go and click on the Facebook page of the Nusra Front and see what they boast about. They behead, kill, and eat the hearts of their opponents, and they publicly post these videos online.
Your reaction to the Syrian foreign minister?
We must not fall for the propaganda of the Syrian regime. You know, the problems in Syria did not begin from outside, were not created from outside. This was the people of Syria, who many millions of whom clearly want dignity for themselves and their country. They want political freedom, they want economic opportunity, the things they haven't had under the Assad regime. And that is something that people all over the world can identify with. Yes, some terrible things have happened, including on both sides, but most of those things have happened at the hands of the regime that has butchered and tortured tens of thousands of its own people. So we must never fall for the propaganda of a regime that would have us believe that a vast part of the population of their own country are fanatical extremists.
And finally, you are in New York at the United Nations as part of your work on behalf of violence against women, or combating violence against women. What progress has been made insofar as making rape as a tool of war illegal?
Well, we're making some progress, and I was pleased that this morning we agreed a new resolution of the UN Security Council, Resolution 2106, that strengthens the work of the United Nations on this. I think over the last year we've succeeded in bringing a lot more global attention on this. The fact that more than 50 countries wanted to speak today here at the United Nations is a really encouraging sign. We've got the G8 nations in April to agree a declaration together. We're now deploying British experts into different parts of the world to help gather evidence of crimes of sexual violence in conflict. So I think this work has begun well over the last year. My ambition is to shift the entire global attitude on these subjects and to shatter the idea of impunity for rape and sexual violence in conflict.
Certainly many women will be really pleased to hear that. And what could you say specifically to the women of Afghanistan who are really terrified once the international forces pull out, particularly if there's some kind of agreement that allows the Taliban any kind of political re-emergence in Afghanistan? They're very, very worried about violence and their rights being taken away.
Well, in Afghanistan, as anywhere in the world, women's rights are a fundamental part of human rights. And of course the commitment to those is set out in the Afghan constitution. What we want to see in any peace process is the Taliban turn against violence, break links with Al-Qaeda, and accept the constitution of Afghanistan. And then it matters how people interpret that and work with that over the years and decades to come. Afghanistan will be a stronger society and a more peaceful society if women are more heavily involved.
Foreign Secretary William Hague, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you very much indeed.